Hi! On the Woodpecker today, as Christmas gift. As you see, I was not really inspired, so I made nutcrackers. I'm not feeling inspired, but Christmas is coming soon. And since I have so much fun making my musical nutcrackers, I've decided to make some traditional ones. So after drawing what I want, I can start. First thing to do is to surface enough wood for the first two. When I have 4 planks cut a little bit longer than needed, I glue them together. The 4 planks are just a bit wider than the final size of my turning. I just need to wait for the glue to dry. And now that it's dry, I end plane one side straight. The other side is ripped on the table saw. Since I need a square block, I move the rip fence up to the width of my glue up and rip 2 square blocks. I'm keeping the small ends for my 5th nutcrackers. Before doing anything else, I cut all the ends. Then I remove all the corners. This will help me turning this round. Now I can begin turning this. I begin by turning a nice cylinder. Next, with a full-size pattern that I've glued on a piece of wood, I mark the transition for my turning. Then I turn this. I begin by the general shape of the hat. Then the body. I start by removing some wood up to the size of the body. When I'm there, I remove the rest up to this size. Then it's time to turn some transitions. First, the neck. Then the belt. Last thing to turn is the shape of the head. All done. The last thing to do is a bit of sanding. But if I want to cut all the pieces, I need to turn some tenons so my chuck jaws have something to grab on. When it's done, I hold the turning with the jaws and cut the head. Then the top of the hat. Finally, the bottom of the body. These are the 2 main parts of one nutcracker. But a real nutcracker has to have a nutcracker on its back. To make this, I need to cut a groove here. So I begin by making a jig for that. I stick 2 scrap pieces of plywood together with double-sided tape and trace the shape of the nutcracker directly on the bottom part of both pieces of plywood. Then I cut this. Next, I can slide the turning into those and cut the groove with a dado stack. I'm not done. I also need to cut another deep groove on top. You can see that I'm using the groove cut to hold the body straight. The bulk is cut with my big bandsaw with a wide blade. The rest is cut with the small one. When I'm done, I still have a bit of cleaning to do, so everything is in line with the back groove. Now I need to make the actual nutcracker. First, I need straight, clean wood. I begin by hand surfacing a board which was lying around. When I'm done, I trace the shape of what I think will work. At that time, I didn't have a nice plan like this one. So after tracing the shape, I cut it. When I try it in place, I can see that it's not okay. I modified the shape and add a piece of wood there. Now I use this shape to trace the next one and cut it. When it's done, I fine-tune the shape. Next, I can drill the pivot hole. Then I drive a long pivot in place. The front part was left longer than really necessary. It's time to fix this. This way, I'm sure the shape is exactly the right one. Next, I shave a flat spot on the head for the nose. When that's done, I trace the shape of the nose and cut it. And finally, glue it in place. I also need to turn some arms and legs. I begin by moving the rib fence to the thickness of my wood and rip a bunch of square blanks. Then I turn some arms. I begin with the arms because they're the hardest to turn. So after turning a nice cylinder, I mark the transitions, and just like I did for the body, I use those marks to help me turn the arms. One done. I do this 3 more times and end up with 4 arms. Now I do the same thing for the legs. But the legs are way easier to turn than the arms. So after no time at all, I have 4 legs. I also need some shoes. To do so, I turn a shape, which looks like 2 shoes sole to sole. When the turning and sanding is done, I cut the shoes out of the block by drilling a hole to the size of the legs. When it's done, I cut this in 2. And this is what the shoes will look like. I really like it. I also need a base. I begin by tracing some circles on a pine board. Then I roughly cut them. To have a nice round base, I stick a rough circle with hot glue on a turning block, put that on the lathe, and turn a round base. I also turn a nice round over, just before sanding the base. Next, I carve my logo and date under the base. But I want more than 2 nutcrackers, so I glue more wood. While the glue dries, I turn the rest of the arms and legs. I also need 4 bent arms. To do so, I cut 4 arms to 45 degrees. Then I glue them back together. Now that the glue of my second glue up is dry, I can make all the same operations I did for the first 2 nutcrackers. But on 2 of the 3 last turnings, I want to do something special. I want 2 crowns. For that, I need to drill some holes right here. To have those holes at the right place, I made some marks on my lathe. I align one line and trace the blank. Turn to the next mark and trace the blank again. I do that for all the marks. Then, with a big Forstner bit, I drill a hole on each marking. After that, I can turn the crown's shapes. Now I cut this on the center of the holes. Now I have to remove the unwanted wood in the center of the crown. The last thing I have to make sure is that the bottom of the crown is totally flat. After that, the rest of the turning is the same as the first two nutcrackers. And since I have a couple nutcrackers under my belt, this goes a lot faster. But I also need to turn some interiors for both crowns. This is quite simple. I begin by turning a base to the size of the inside of the crown, and then I turn the shape I want. The first one is quite simple, a dome shape. But for the second one, I turn something a little bit more elaborate. I like this shape. To glue the head back in place, I drill some dowel holes. One on each side of the top groove. I have to take care not to drill into the small pivot hole. Then I can transfer the hole's position onto the head. To do so, I use some center finders, put the head in place, and push on the head. This leaves some indentation on the head, so I know where to drill the holes. Since I'm at the drill press, I drill the holes for the legs at the bottom of the body and on top of the base. After cutting a bunch of small lengths of dowels, I glue them to the top of the body. But I'll only glue the head after the paint will be done. My crowns are fantastic, but the tips are a bit too pointy. I sand them flat. This is way better. Using the same sandpaper, I sand a small spot on lots of small wooden balls. This is not easy to sand them because they're so small and it hurts holding them tight enough so I can sand them. But I manage it anyway. And here they are. Now I just need to glue them to the tip of both crowns. I also glue a bigger one just here. I'm missing a drum. Nothing too special here. I turn a small cylinder and cut it. I also want two shields. The first thing I have to do is to rip a thin strip of maple. But this is far from being straight. I have to use the drum sander. Next, I can carve my logo inside each shield. When it's done, I use the exterior shape to guide the scroll saw and cut the shields. The last thing to do is to sand the edges. I'm now ready to paint this. But before doing so, I identify which body goes with which head. Then I start to paint them. I start with the heads. Next, the red. Okay, I spray so much red that I have to use more than one spray can. But after all, it is called Christmas red. But I still need to paint the black of the legs. While the paint dries, I start to make the nutcrackers accessories, like both swords. After ripping a piece of wood to the right width, I cut this into two and sand some pointy tips. Then with the CNC, I cut two square holes. After cutting them to length, I glue them on the square end of each sword. To simulate the handle, I turn two small handles. Two nutcrackers will have a rifle, so I trace two rifle shapes and cut them. All the missing pieces. But the paint is far from being finished. I mask the part that is done and spray another color. But I'm out of black spray, so the rest will be applied with a brush. But it's far from being the only color I brush. I'm wondering if painting all the 5 of them didn't take more time than turning them. Because after all the fill colors, I still have lots of details to paint with a lot of different colors. And this takes time. The eyes have 4 layers, and I need to wait for the paint to dry before brushing the next color. But lucky for me, I have a lot of details to paint here and there, so this makes it long enough for the eye to dry. When the paint is completely finished, I can glue this together. I begin by drilling the shoulders holes into the arm. I also drill some holes for the swords. And these are the first pieces that I glue. I glue the blade to the end with a small dowel in between. For the handle, I had already turned a small tenon. I leave the swords alone and drill some holes into the bodies for the arms. Next, I cut some wires for the cracker's pivot. When I'm done, I can assemble them. Next, the legs are glued to the base and the body. While the glue dries, I glue the shoes. Not too complicated. A bit of glue and put them in place. I really love the look with all those shoes. Now I can glue all the arms. I begin by cutting a bunch of small dowels. Next, I glue them inside each arm. To make the process simpler, I glue the arms in 2 steps. The first one is to glue small dowels like I'm doing. When the first step is done, I glue the inside of each crown. On the first one, I'm unable to sit the top properly. I need to use a clamp. But the second one is a charm. Now I'm ready to glue the heads in place. This is quite easy. A bit of glue into the heads, on the dowels, and put them together. Then I can finish to glue the arms. But before gluing the arms of the drum player, I need to glue the drum in place. I begin by drilling the 2 holes. Then I glue the drum. While the glue of the drum is drying, I can make the final paint touches. After the glue is dry enough, I can glue the arms. I clamp them in place because I want them to stay exactly at this position. Next, I can glue the accessories, starting by the rifle. All the accessories are glued in place with hot glue. And with this last shield, my nutcrackers are all completed. But I'm not totally done yet. I still need to spray 2 coats of clear, shiny finish on all of them. When this is done, I only need to do one last thing. Stick a wig on their heads. First of all, I cut 1 strip of fake fur to the width I need. Next, I use the pattern I made to trace the shape of the top of the head and cut it. After making sure it's okay, I cut it to the right length. Here I'm careful not to cut too deep. Otherwise, I'll cut the hair under the fabric. A last check, and since it's perfect, I can cut 4 more wigs. I just need to glue them in place. For that, I use hot glue. I spread a bit on the fabric and put this onto the head. Okay, I just have to cope with the pain of the hot glue for a couple of seconds, and the hairs are in place. A small price to pay for such beautiful hair. The last thing to do is to glue a small pinch. And when it's done, my nutcrackers are totally finished. And here are the reactions of the 5 people who received them.
Wow!
Moi aussi j'en ai un! Oh!
C'est cute!
Oh, il est beau!
Il est vraiment beau!
Oh, il est beau! En plus,
Oh, un beau casse-noisette!
j'ai reçu un beau casse-noisette! Wow!
It's beautiful!
I know, it's not very original, but the important thing is that I have fun making them, and they're really easy to make. Each of them has different painted pattern. This was not necessary since I gave them to 5 different loved ones, but I wanted to have fun. So if just like me you have no idea what present to make next Christmas, think of making nutcrackers. And if your loved one doesn't like it, at least they can eat themselves with it. As for myself, I hope to see you soon for the next episode of the Woodpecker.